was a tragedy in Toronto this week. A group of people lost their lives in a horrible outcome from mortgage fraud. The mortgage con man, his associate, who was the person who had the mortgage license, and a victim of fraud. Huge fraud, $1.2 million, this person's entire life savings, stolen by the fraudsters and lost for good. And in the end, a tragic set of shootings. Really a horrible outcome. So what can we derive from it? Well, the simple story was that this poor man had been convinced to invest in private mortgage lending by high rates of return by someone who was judged to be reputable and someone who had actually worked hard to gain the trust of the victim. And the money was all stolen. There was no mortgage placed. And then worse, possibly even worse, the victim was convinced to take out a loan, a mortgage on his own property at 5% in order to derive 12, 13, 14% revenue from a private mortgage. So not only was his entire life savings wiped out for him and his family, but they were left with a debt on their home that resulted in them eventually having to sell the property. And truly a tragic disaster for that individual who regrettably took matters into his own hands. And that was the end of those two mortgage people. Now, the one individual the con man had a long history of theft. There's an estimate that it goes as high as $17 million worth of money stolen from various victims in the Toronto area on fake mortgages and false investment promises. You know, I think though we've got to face the fact that one of the truths about this is we don't prosecute this crime properly. You know, all these people lost their licenses. Our regulator, the mortgage regulator, has become relatively efficient at getting rid of people who are bad. They lose their licenses very quickly. But then these same evildoers they've already stolen the money. And sometimes they actually recruit others to act for them. But look, the real problem was that this criminal was charged. He was charged for stealing the money. And over COVID, because it's busy and it's hard to prove and the judges were unavailable and COVID created a whole mess, they dropped the charges. The Crown dropped the charge on what was obviously an open and shut case, which created the despair and the futility that drove the victim to do something that nobody should ever do. But this is a pattern. It's a pattern of either the judges, the courts, the prosecution being too slow to act, or they're just not doing it right. So let's look at the other huge fraud that happened 10 years ago in Ontario. Fortress Development. Fortress Development robbed their investment victims of nearly $400 million. There's almost over $1 billion worth of mortgages involved, but some people actually got their money back. Those individuals, after years of investigation, were finally charged, and they haven't got to court yet. Now, in all that time, in all that distance, that incredible length of time that there is from the nearly 8 years ago that they were first lost their licenses to not in court yet, there's so much time to move the assets. There's so much time, even if they're found guilty, which they may not be, there's so much time to move the money, move it offshore, do phony divorces, and somehow ex-wives and children end up with all your money. But you create a situation where the victims can't recover any money from the actual con man by waiting so long, by investigations taking so long, by prosecutions taking so long. The money's lost, and we have a hard time going after some of these people through class action lawsuits, because if the criminal charges have never come to pass yet, how are you going to get the class action to work? Look, we have another one, Claire Drage. Claire Drage looks like over $100 million worth of various mortgage and promissory note investment. Might be as much as $100 million is gone. So what's happened? Claire Drage no longer has a mortgage license, filed for personal bankruptcy, corporations went into receivership. Is she going to walk? Like, how long is it going to take for a thorough investigation of what really happened there? I don't know if she's guilty of any wrongdoing or not. I don't have any idea. But I sure think that if people lose $100 million, it needs to be thoroughly investigated, like very meticulously, lots of cops, lots of Crown prosecutors studying it, finding out what the hell happened, okay? Look, how do you avoid it? How can people avoid fraud? Here's the most horrible truth. The people who set out to do wrong, or the people who are just seeing that things are going wrong but keep taking people's money anyway, they're good at it. They know how to create trust. They know how to convince people. In many cases, they were dealing with the same people for years, and they had trust through a community. And guess what? The money's gone. The prosecutions run slowly, or the charges are dismissed. And the victims see no hope of getting their money back. Our justice system is letting them down. So, justice system certainly let that man down who took the matter into his own hands. Never do that. But folks, we need to prosecute these people much more effectively.